Hey everybody, welcome to today's live stream. I moved my camera around and cannot seem to get it back into the same position that it was before. So we'll have to figure that out later. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me today. My name is Stephen. I'm the Editing Bard, and this channel is designed to bring you writing tips that make sense. So super excited to have you guys here, still trying to get it adjusted appropriately. Chat is open, just so you guys know. If you have any questions, I want to answer them. So if you have anything right over in this direction, right down there, you can see where you can submit your questions. I go through and this thing is doing that autofocus thing again. Gosh, dang it. Swear to goodness, I'm going to get that fixed one of these days, and it's not going to be doing the freaky zoomy in out thing. But I go through and I curate questions and scour the interwebs to find questions that I can answer that I hope are going to help you really improve your writing. So now that we're kind of settled here, I'm going to start diving into those questions. All right, so the first one today is, what are some tips for writing really good fan fiction / books? So I have written a lot of fan fiction. I write primarily Lord of the Rings fan fiction. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, and so it is very easy for me to kind of dive into that realm. But in terms of figuring out how to write good fan fiction, you want to have a good definition of what bad fan fiction is. And if I could pull it up and go to Wattpad, which is where I primarily post all of my stuff, you would see that most of what's on Wattpad is not the greatest. It's not to say that the writers themselves are bad. It's that the execution is lacking in the storytelling. And for a lot of new writers, that's just kind of how it is. I was that way when I first started. Actually, I knew I was going to keep this close by. So this is the very, very first plot outline that I did when I first started. As you can see, it is margin to margin. There are no paragraphs. It is just a giant wall of text. So the execution on this was not good. Let me tell you, it was bad. It was really bad, but it improved. So you want to know what the definition of bad fan fiction is. Spend 5 minutes going around on Wattpad. You'll find bad fan fiction, and it is typically where you go and the stories, there's no substance to it, right? They're using the same exact dialogue, the same exact really everything for like the entirety of the story. A good example is one of the Lord of the Rings stories that I was reading was verbatim what was from the book and from the movie. That's not what makes good fan fiction. Good fan fiction, the whole point of it is to explore different ideas, do different things. So when you are simply just rehashing the book, that's not good fan fiction. That's just called plagiarism. There's a big difference. You want to look at what the fandom is lacking in many cases. As an example, when I started to do my Lord of the Rings fan fiction, I looked at it and said, what is everybody else doing, and how do I not do that? And everybody was writing third age fan fiction where you have the 10th Walker or the 9th Walker who, because someone else got killed off or didn't make it, and it was going through the same exact journey. While that is interesting, because and I've done it, it's not necessarily engaging. You have to really have a good reason why things are happening in that particular way, because the diehard Lord of the Rings fans will burn you alive at the stake. The Fellowship is sacred, and yeah. So try not to mess with the Fellowship too much. But there are literally 3 other ages in like thousands of years that you can do with, using the Lord of the Rings as the example for this. Richness of character, exploring different aspects of characters, the adding some different world building features to the story that enhance the story, that still feel like an integral part of the story. In my Into Depravity fan fiction, which was like the deeper, darker, sadder, more depressing version of Smeagol's backstory, I made it sound canon. So I made it sound like I wrote it with the intention that when someone read this, they'd go, holy crap, this explains everything about Smeagol. And that was the reaction that I got. But it was taking a character and then just flipping it on its head a little bit, but still using everything that is provided in the story. So that's a way that you can look at doing good fan fiction, is that you're not looking to change everything. You're looking to change very specific things for a very specific purpose. In Sherlock fan fiction, you have, and I'll be honest, I haven't read a lot of Sherlock fan fiction, so I don't have the breadth that I do with the Lord of the Rings one. But when the characters are doing something that is outside of their character, it throws readers off, and that is a good way to lose readers. When I did Smeagol, everything lined up with Smeagol's character. When I've written Boromir or Aragorn, they were still at their core who they were portrayed to be in the Lord of the Rings movies and in the books, with different traits that they kind of grew into. And I humanized them a little bit. Aragorn is very confident in his ability to rule in the book. Whereas in the movies, we saw him kind of wrestle with that a little bit more. So I kind of took a combination of both and kind of meshed them together. Same thing when you're doing a book. You have to have those interesting characters. Now, it's a little bit different, obviously, if you're writing a book and no one knows who the heck that you're writing about, because it's brand new. But you have to be consistent with those character traits. Even if they grow and they learn to develop new traits, you still have to be consistent. Consistency in the world building, consistency in character, consistency in plot. If you'll notice a theme here, it's consistency. You have to do that, because if you break that, you lose the reader more often than not. Too often, you'll make these promises to the reader, whether intentionally or no, by saying, like, establishing certain rules, and then if you break those rules with no real purpose, you lose the reader. So that is a way that you can create good quality fan fiction, is that you actually take the characters and you go, okay, this is what their traits are. This is what people know them as. This is why people love them. And then you twist it on its head just a little bit. not a lot, but a little bit, and you earn the right to mess with the characters later on if you've established that you're going to treat the characters with respect to how they are in the books, in the movies, in whatever shows that you're watching. That is the way that you want to go for that. All right, so moving on to the next question, which I really, really liked, is how can I finalize my novel's edits? It seems as though I'm never fully satisfied with the final product as I continue to find little things to, quote, improve upon. Am I just nitpicking at this point? Probably, yeah, for being honest. It is very, very hard, and I've fallen into this trap as well, of you go through you get your first draft written, and then you go in and do a self-edit. Now, if you're not familiar with what kind of editing that you're supposed to be doing that first edit, then you're kind of screwed, because you're setting yourself up for many, many rounds of edits because you're not doing it in a systematic way. And I can tell you that because I've been there and I've done it, which is why it's taken me so friggin' long to write my books. The other thing is that you cannot expect perfection in your editing. I don't expect perfection in my editing, and I do editing. You have to look at it and be like, okay, have I gotten it as good as I possibly can? And am I actually just nitpicking these little itty bitty details? If you can look at that and seriously say, yep, this is absolutely it. I am being picky nitty, all of those things, then you need to take a step back from the book and you need to pass it off to somebody else. If you're going to self-publish, you should be getting editors in the first. You should be doing. You should be having professional editors edit your book. Doing a self-edit is great because usually it helps kind of cut down some of that upfront cost, because the less work that the editor has to do, and the more concise and the more not concise, the more precise they can information that they can give you. So be aware of that. But when you're doing that self-editing, you really have to limit yourself. You have to give yourself parameters in which to kind of go through and say, all right, this is where I stop. So the levels of editing that you want to do to start off with, and if you're taking notes, I would highly recommend taking these notes, is you want to start off with the developmental edit first. And the developmental edit is that big picture overview. You're not getting into the scenes necessarily. You're not getting into the grammar, the punctuation. You're looking at character arcs, plot arc. Is everything making sense? Does it all flow? Am I being consistent? Is the world building there? Am I lacking something in the bigger context of the story? That's the first edit that you need to do. Because if you do that edit first, a lot of the other stuff, the copy edits, the line edits, the proofreads, a lot of that is going to get caught. And you're going to be able to fix that before you even get to there. Because those bigger plot points are way more important at the start. Next, you want to do a copy edit and a line edit, which is where you just kind of zoom in a little bit. So you're looking at, the context in which everything is being spoken. You're looking at grammar, syntax, punctuation, the flow of scenes. This is what I typically do as part of my developmental edit. Is I actually comment on a scene by scene level. So it does take a little bit longer than usual for a developmental edit, but you're getting much more detailed feedback on how to fix the scenes at that level. Because if I'm just telling you, like, yeah, this was broken, it doesn't do you any good if you have to then go back and search for it. So I point out exactly where it is. Then you do proofreading. Proofreading is where you go through and you try to find all the ugly typos. And again, you want somebody to do that for you because you're so invested in the story that you really should be handing it off to somebody else who is going to have a fresh pair of eyes. But see, it's hard when you're talking about self-editing because we want perfection for our stories. I want perfection for my story. The sad reality is that it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be typos. There's going to be things that I miss. There's stuff that I miss in my copy on my website. I've had other editors, sometimes clients, even point out like, hey, this is misspelled. And I've read through it. I've gone over it. I've put it through word processors and it still gets missed. So I'm just as human as everybody else. As much as I want perfection for my book, I know that perfection is unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And so you have to give yourself permission to not have it be perfect. You have to give yourself that permission. And then when you give yourself permission, then that stress goes away. And so you don't find yourself nitpicking because you're going to go, yeah, that doesn't matter. It literally will not change the story one single bit. And I'm just being nitpicky. You'll get to that point where you're able to do that. And then you can go, you know what? I don't need to do that. It's good as it is. I'm just going to move forward to that next step, whatever that next step is. So give yourself permission to not have the book be perfect. Just get it as good as you can possibly get it. And then once you've gotten it to that point, that is when you look at hiring an editor, depending on the route that you're going to go. If you're going the traditional publishing route, then do a self-edit, a developmental edit specifically. Do a developmental edit first, then fix up whatever grammar mistakes that need to be along with the punctuation, and then you can go and move into querying and doing all of that kind of stuff. That'll help tremendously in giving a polished look for that agent to be able to go, oh, well, yeah, we need to fix some stuff, but that's what the editors are for. Self-publishing, then you do a self-edit, and then you move forward from a self-edit to finding a editor who's going to be able to help you in that way. All right, grab a water, and we're moving on. So hopefully that is answering the questions, because. And tell me if I'm missing something, or if tell me if you disagree. I want to have conversations about this because I'm not under any assumptions that I'm right about every single thing. So next one is would you suggest building a world or universe from scratch, or basing it off of a real world example and then adding your own stuff to it? I would recommend starting with our world, and then excuse me, starting with our world and then moving towards adding your own stuff into it. And that is mainly because it's a little bit easier when you're starting off as a new author to do it that way than it is coming up with something just completely brand new. And that kind of ties into something that we'll address in one of the later questions. But you want to create something that is familiar enough to the reader, and using real world as an example is a great way to do that. So if you're going to have, let's say fantasy, because that's what I primarily write, basing your fantasy novel off of kind of the medieval style and theme is very common. And so you'll see a lot of those kinds of things like cavalry, sword fights, bows, spears, excuse me. You'll see that kind of stuff in the fantasy genre, but it's based in real world, or it's based off of real world stuff. So you want to make sure that you are kind of connecting those together, because fantasy has a very kind of specific set of things that are expected from them. You know, fantastical creatures, in large part, epic sword fights, large battles, huge stakes, quests, hero's journey, slaying dragons, like magic systems, kingdoms, like those are things that people have come to expect from fantasy novels. And so you can easily translate real world stuff into a fantasy novel. Now, with something like science fiction, you're going to be taking leaps and bounds and assumptions on like where technology can be or will be, depending on when you're having it take place, has been. Um, and the difference is that you can have that Earth-like planet, but you can also just kind of create whole new worlds, quite literally, because you are going to have, you know, volcanic worlds, ice worlds, ocean worlds. Um, there was another one there. It's gone. Um, you know, asteroid mining facilities. Like those are things that you typically will see in your standard sci-fi novel. If we look at Dune, Frank Herbert created very realistic worlds based on our world. So there was Terra, which was old Earth, and then you know, you had like Caladan, which was primarily ocean, and there was tons of archipelagos and islands. You had Gidi Prime, which was used to be a lot more lush, but the Harkonnens basically just screwed it up with the industrial uh, pollution that they had. Kayatang is pretty much all city, and so, you know, there are very few kind of natural places because it's the seat of the empire. So those are different kinds of examples when you're doing science fiction, is that you're going to be creating those new worlds, but you can still base those things off of real world stuff that lends it that familiarity to the reader, and it helps them connect with what it is that you're writing about. Um, so that would be my recommendation. There is start with the real world, especially if you are new to writing. Start off with the real world as an example, and then take that thing and then flip it on its head. Do something different with it. Um, you know, so in my fantasy novels, I use Welsh, Scottish, and Irish um, culture that has inspired, along with some Norse. Uh, I've used that culture to inspire the cultures within my world, and so they have very similar feels. They have torques. They have, which is like a necklace. They have the brooches on the capes. They have light fitting shirts and breeches. So yeah, I've taken that and then I've added the fantasy aspect to it. So it's not a verbatim, this is exactly what Irish culture would look like, or this is what Welsh culture would look like, or this is what Scottish Gaelic culture looks like. I've taken those and implemented different things into them in a way that makes sense within my world. You would need to do the same exact thing. If your world has um, like an early form of democracy, then you might be looking at something that is more like more of a Greek culture. So find those little things from the real world that kind of match with what it is that you're looking for in your story, and then you take that and go, okay, what am I going to do with this now? I want to add an element to it, and don't feel like you have to do exactly what it is that culture was doing. because it doesn't matter. It's your world. You want to give a flavor of familiarity and then a dash of the fantastical. Um, Again, I'm talking about fantasy here because that's what I primarily write. But these elements can be used in any genre that you're wanting to write. So it applies in all, and just take your time and really kind of figure out what you want to do. Don't take it to the point where I had taken it, which is where I'm looking up like what medieval style armor the ancient, or not medieval, what style armor the ancient Persians used in their cavalry tactics, and like don't go that route unless you're writing historical fiction. That's not what I was writing, and I got too deep into that. And that is a trap that you can fall into. So just be warned, be careful of that. All right, next question. If I have a lot of rich fictional historical background in my novel, how should I go about explaining it without info dumping? That is a great question, and something that I see happen a lot. And I know because I've done it. When you spend all of your time building this rich background, this rich history, suddenly you find yourself like, oh, I want to tell everybody about all of the things that I have found. Like, they're amazing. Don't do that, especially in info dumps. Now, more often than not, people will info dump in a prologue. The prologue tends to be the thing that people hate the most. And I see it all the time where people say, don't write prologues, don't write prologues. And for the love of all that's holy, don't write prologues. I don't believe that. I believe that every story could have a prologue if it serves the right purpose. For some, it's the lead into chapter 1 when it could have just been chapter 1, and it makes more sense. Typically, a prologue is something that's going to take place in the past, and it is a setup for what the present time of the book is. You can layer all of these world building aspects throughout the book, and that's really how you want to do it, because it creates a sense of intrigue for the reader. So if you have somebody who is let's see, trying to think of a good example here. Yep, not thinking of one. Taking that past information and then making it an integral part of what the character is doing and how they are interacting with the world around them, that shows rather than tells more about the world. So if there is a particular economic system, you don't need to tell people, hey, this is the economics that grew out of, this social trading network and that became this conglomerate, and no one cares. Honestly, no one cares. But if you show the character interacting with this conglomerate, this trading network, and it has a very specific impact in their life, let's say like the conglomerate of traders swindled the main character out of their family inheritance, but it's legal to do because of these systems that have been put in place. So rather than saying like, well, based on their socioeconomic standing, they could just take whatever they wanted, you've actually shown it, and you've shown the history behind it in doing that. So hopefully that makes sense. But when you're world building, when you have all of that lore and that history, you want to incorporate it into the world and layer it through the chapters, and be very purposeful about how you show it and how you approach it in the world building. And you do that specifically by having the characters interact with that. So like I have 12 books planned for my fantasy series, and I have I have a lot of lore because I've been working on it for freaking ever. And so when when a character is interacting, there's going to be songs and poems, um, great histories and stories and legends that have been told about creatures and people. Um, when I want to showcase those, I have the characters interact with them in a very specific way. I can't say what because that would be spoiling. um, Plus, it's not fully written yet. But you have them interact. That's the big thing, is that there's an action that shows the reader why there is a certain thing happening to a certain set of peoples, and it's based on the history that you've created. Um, you can get away with kind of info dumping a little bit if you have it in a very specific conversation. Typically, in fantasy, it is the mentor explaining to the mentee why the world works as it does. That is a big trope in fantasy, and I mean I get it, and I've done it, and I probably would use it in that way, because there's certain aspects where you should be telling the reader um, a background in our background information, and that is when you want to set up something that's going to happen in the future. So if I say something in chapter 5 and I'm having the main character explain to the other MC what these particular things are and what they mean, I am going to have them have some sort of interaction with those things later on in the book. So it's not info dumping for the sake of info dumping. It's actually doing just a little bit of an info dump, no more than just a couple of paragraphs broken up through conversation, because we don't do monologues unless you're on this side of the screen and then I'm just talking at you and you guys are listening to me. Which, I mean, you're putting yourself through it, so more power to you. But you're actually setting up something very specific with that world. So that is a great way to kind of incorporate all of those different aspects of your world and the fictional histories, is that you have them interact with that. Tolkien does this in a very beautiful way with all of the songs and poems and prose that he has in the stories. And they interact. So like when Aragorn, so if when they are going through the Midgewater marshes with Aragorn, the Hobbitar, he sings about Luthien, and that leads to Frodo asking questions. And so then Aragorn kind of goes into a little bit of an info dump, talking about who Luthien was, kind of some of the backstory. That is what I'm talking about here, is that you set up something, and there's a very, very specific thing that it kind of sets up for Aragorn, which is his love for Arwen, and kind of talking a little bit about that, even though she doesn't really come into play much in the books. And they shoehorned her in more to the movies. Those are the types of examples that I'm talking about. So if you want to do more of that, read books that do that. Read Lord of the Rings, read The Hobbit, read The Silmarillion, read a book in your genre that does that kind of setup. Another way that I've seen it done is, or that I know it's done, is Brandon Sanderson. He will use quotes from ancient text that kind of sets up that particular chapter. So you can do that as well. You can set it up for success and showcase that more by actually showing the lore, showing these paragraphs of history and ancient text that explain some of the concepts of the world. That's a great way to go about it. All right. And if you guys haven't already, go down and click the subscribe button and hit the little bell. It is over on this side. I'm getting better. It's over on this side, pretty sure. About 85% confident. It's on this side. That way you guys can get updated on when I'm doing my live streams and when I am also uploading the video content that I have. And down below in the show notes, I have links that take you to tools for writers, and also to where you guys can connect with me outside of the YouTubes if you so choose to have more bardly bardness in your life. And like on Instagram, I post memes and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. So if you enjoy that kind of stuff, you should come join me. Okay, moving on to the next question is what is the best writing advice you have received? I actually was just talking to this or about this very thing to a group of middle schoolers on Wednesday. And the best thing that I received is that there is always someone better at writing than me. Yep, that's the best writing advice. That's what I would say is the best writing advice that I'd ever received, is that there's always going to be somebody smarter and someone better at writing than I am. And what that actually did for me, and what I'm going to encourage you to think on this, is that it actually removes all of the pressure off of you to write like someone else, because they're better than you are. So you don't have to worry about it. So like, you know, behind me, this whole section right here, that's Lord of the Rings stuff. And I mean, I have multiple versions of the same thing in Lord of the Rings. I can't write like Tolkien does. Very few, if anyone, can write like Tolkien did. I mean, he was a linguistic genius who created multiple languages with complex systems within that language. He created complex family trees, histories. I mean, there's a reason why his son and his like great grandson and his, like his all and like every single kid that is passed down is still working on his notes, and will probably forever be working on his notes. Up here is Frank Herbert in the Dune saga. I call it saga. I don't know if it's called a saga, but I call it Dune saga. I can't write like Frank Herbert. The political machinations that he has in his book are just mind-boggling. Over here, yes, it was over on there. I lose track when it's all in reverse. Is Stephen R. Lawhead and Ted Decker and Frank Peretti. I can't write like them. They have inspired my writing, absolutely, but I cannot write like them. They are better at it than I am because they've been writing for a lot longer than I have. I'm still, you know, even 13 years into writing, I still have a ton to learn. And so instead of holding myself up to that standard, for me, the golden standard is Tolkien for world building. Even though that I know that I'm not going to be able to world build like Tolkien world builds, I can let it inspire me to grow and do better. So that's why that's why there always is going to be someone smarter than you is so helpful for me, and then was the best writing advice that I have, because then I could just focus on being me. I could focus on writing my stories, the stories that I wanted to tell in the way that I wanted to tell them. I wasn't held to a standard that I could not compete with. You know, people, they'll hold themselves up to Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Suzanne Collins. They will hold themselves up to these standards because we look up to them as readers and as authors, because they've done so well. But we don't write like them. We each have there was a great quote, is that there is no unique messages, only unique messengers. So the story that I'm telling, no one else is going to be able to tell, and I can take solace in that. I can be like, this, I'm going to own this. And the same goes for you. No matter where, oh my goodness. Something just flew into my eye. Not particularly happy about that. Ow. Swear to goodness, that's the one downside of live streams, is that things just happen. Getting back on track, except I've gone off the rails and just like just all over the place. With you don't have to hold yourself up to a standard. You can tell your unique story. That is the awesome part. So right now, I'm going to tell you, you're not the best writer. There's always going to be someone better at writing than you are. So don't worry about it. Write the best that you can. Continue to read, continue to grow, continue to learn, and you will get better. You're not going to reach the heights that Stephen King has reached because he's reaching a particular audience. You have your own audience waiting for you to tell your story, but it takes you actually writing your story, and stop trying to be like everybody else. Be you. Be the author that you were meant to be by practicing and learning and getting better. That's really the only way to go. So that's my sagely bardic advice for you, is stop worrying about what other people are doing. Don't worry about what they're going to think of your story. Write your story and continue to improve. And if you get stuck and you're just like, I can't seem to make it past that, then you're not ready to write that book. That was what I had learned. What was it now? 2 years ago. I was listening to the Writing Excuses podcast, which if you don't listen to that, you need to go listen to that. I highly recommend it. It's Brandon Sanderson, Mary Robinette Kowal, Howard Taylor, and Dan Wells, and they are filled with knowledge. Most of where I've learned how to improve my writing has come from listening to them on how to improve writing. But that was one of the things that they said, is that if you get stuck, you're not the author that you are meant to be in order to write the book that you want to write. So take time, learn, hone your craft, and then come back to it later when you're ready. And that's what I had to do. I took time off and I started working on my fan fiction. And then I went back, and now I'm in the process of finishing the second draft of the first book of 12 books that I have planned for this fantasy series. And I know now that I'm the author that I need to be able to write this particular book. I'm not going to say the whole series, but for this particular book, I'm the author that I need to be able to do that, because I've learned so much from doing that, from practicing. So that is what I want you guys to do, is take that and go, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to not try and be like everybody else when it comes to writing my book, because no one's going to be able to write your book the way that you write it. Not Stephen King, not J.K. Rowling, not Tolkien, not Susan Collins, not Frank Herbert, not Stephen R. Lawhead. No one is going to be able to write the book that you want to write, because it is your unique message that you have to share with the world. So focus on that, not anything else. Otherwise, I'll find you. Okay. Next question is, I'm currently writing a novel at 13. My sister says that I won't get very far and I'll never publish it because my writing isn't good. How do I respond to that and keep writing? See the previous thing that I just said about not giving a crap what other people think about your writing. That's first and foremost. The other thing is that don't let someone put their fears of failure on you. It doesn't matter what age you are. There's kids who are 10 years old or probably less. I don't have a figure for it, but there are people who are young who are publishing books. So don't fall into the trap of listening to someone else put their fears on you, because what she's saying is that you can't do that because I couldn't imagine doing that. That's what they're saying. The people that are saying that like you can't write and publish this, you're not good enough, are what they're actually saying is that I don't think I'm good enough to do that. Therefore, you're not good enough to do that. Therefore, you should not try it. Don't try it, because you'll fail. That's half the fun of writing, is the failing. I mean, maybe not in the moment, kind of like that hindsight 2020 thing. Swear to goodness, this camera drives me nuts when it's with the zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. I'm really gonna have to try and figure out that. Sorry, ranty rabbit hole. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can learn how to write. You can learn how to write stories. Period. You have to learn how to write anyway. You have to learn how to write your name. You have to learn how to write words. It's a matter of learning how to form those words into a story that is challenging and that you have to work at. But never let anyone look down on you because of your age and say that you can't write a book, that your writing's not good. My writing wasn't good when I was 13. Good Lord, I was still learning how to write. I mean, you have the basics, sure, but like people, there are kids who start writing stories like when they're 4. Are those like publishable stories? Probably not. Are they going to have to go through some revisions? Yes, but that doesn't mean that you stop writing. You are always supposed to write. If it's in your heart to write, then you pour out that onto paper. Period. End of story. And don't let anyone tell you differently. Plain and simple. Because the world needs authors. Thank you, Verity. The world needs authors to publish stories. We need people that are younger to tell the stories that they have. You want to know why? I'm going to go down a ranty rabbit hole right here for a second, so bear with me. You want to know why we have such high rates of teens? And this is my own opinion. The reason we have high rates of teen suicide, teen depression, kids cutting themselves, people with eating disorders, people with mental illnesses, is because we are stifling creativity in kids. They're no longer allowed to use their imagination because they have to go get a job and they have to raise a family and they have to prepare for retirement. They have to open checking accounts. They have to balance books. Good God, does that sound fun to you? It doesn't sound fun to me, and I'm an adult. I wanted to be an adult so bad growing up, and then I get to be an adult. I'm like, I got a lot of responsibility. I have bills. You don't have bills when you're a kid. You're supposed to use your imagination. When that's stifled, then you just feel dead inside. This is speaking from somebody who suffered with depression all through my teenage years. And I was still writing a little bit, but my stuff was dark. And people don't see that correlation. Like when kids are writing dark things, it's because inside they feel stifled. They feel dead. They feel like they have nowhere to express themselves, to share their stories, to feel like they're heard. And so if you are going to tell somebody that you can't write because you're not good enough and they're comparing you to Stephen King, then one, that's unfair. Two, if you are that person, you're the problem. I'm just going to put it out there. You are part of the problem. Any parent who says to their kids, you can't write, because they're too afraid of because they're putting their fears on their kid, because everybody knows the old thing of like, well, writers get paid peanuts and they don't make a living. They have to have a real job in order to do that, right? We as authors, we hear that all the time. You have to have a real job, and that's true. You do have to have a job for a while, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible to then be making a living off of writing. That's one of my goals, is to be able to write books and live off of that. That is what I want to do. And then have my business where I get to coach young authors, or any author really, to be able to write their books and share their stories. That's one of the things that when I'm talking to people, they're just like, you believed in me when no one else did. I'm like, damn right I did, because you have a story to tell. And this goes for everyone. Verity says all this, creativity is so important. I had so much free time to pursue my writing my whole childhood, and I am everlastingly grateful for it. Exactly. We have to cultivate creativity. If you don't know how to tell a story, you can learn how to tell a story. Anyone. And I swear to goodness, if I get any comments from the snooty tooty author saying, well, you have to read a certain way, I will come after you. I will straight up come after you. I am not scared to say that I'm going to come after you, because I've seen too many people let their hopes and dreams die, and they've given up on them simply because somebody in a nice frame of nicer tone than I would care to say told them that they couldn't do that and they shouldn't, and they should give up. That is not okay. No author should be telling somebody that they write garbage or that they should give up on their dreams because they suck at writing. Everyone, and I can guarantee you, that person who's saying that at one point in time sucked at writing. Because while some people catch on to certain things with writing, that goes for anything. It is a skill that is learned. It is no different than learning how to ride a bike, than how to cook a meal, than how to write a check, which I still can't do accurately. Like, I'll just be honest. Like, there's so many places that I have to write, and like, why do I have to spell out the word for what I'm paying when there's the numbers that I just dropped? Anyway, it's a whole different subject, and completely off topic. I know checks, they're just yeah, exactly. Thank you, Verity. You have to start at the bottom. Dang it. Everybody does. Every famous author started somewhere, and they started thinking that their own work was crap. Most of them died before they became popular. So, I mean, like, I'm hoping that I at least have some return and some enjoyment, like, while I'm alive writing my books. But don't let anyone ever tell you that you cannot write a story. Ever. Period. End of that story. Ever. All right. I'm gonna step down off the stool. Otherwise, I will just kind of keep repeating the same things again, because as you can see, I am very, very passionate about storytelling and about people's ability to tell their own unique stories. Everybody deserves that chance. Every single person. Because not only does it help them, because they're processing, there's a cathartic aspect to writing, but what you are effectively doing is you are denying someone else the blessing that book would have been in their life. Think about that for a moment. You are denying someone else the blessing that book would have been in their life. That's not okay. So don't do that. Otherwise, I will find you. Just like from Taken, I will find you. And then break your laptop or something, because I'm not going to kill anybody, but I'm going to break something. Okay, so I'm running out of time because that took way more of my ranty rabbit trail than I had expected. So next question is, as an author, what do you aim to give your readers through your writing? This is a great example. Again, this just leads into it. Not intentional, by the way, because I was very focused on my ranty rabbit hole. I want to give them an experience. I want to give them a message. With my writing, so I write Christian fantasy. And the message that I have that I want to share people is that they are loved, they are valuable, and that they are cherished, and that they have purpose, that they have meaning. That is what I want my writing to communicate to my readers. And you have to figure out what your message is. I know what my message is. And that is the message that I consistently try to put into every single book that I plan on writing, the book that I'm currently writing, the coaching or the clients who I coach, the developmental edits that I do. It's not, this is the thing. It's not just about my book. It's about how I live. I live my message. Why I am so passionate about teaching people how to tell a story. Not the academic style of storytelling, but getting them out of their own head into creative mode to tell their story, is because they are loved, they are cherished, they are valued, they have a voice, they have a story to tell that is going to impact somebody. And that is what I focus on with my stories, is that I want someone to know that I see them. When they read my story, I want them to know that I see them where they're at, by pouring out my own personal experiences and the truths and the healing that has happened in my own life. I express that in words, in the form of a story for someone else. And I know that someday in the future that my book is going to inspire somebody, not because I'm special, not because there's anything that is that makes me better than somebody else, but because I simply was honest and I was authentic. And they're gonna, I'm my hope is that they're gonna look at that and they're gonna go, wow, if he can do that, then I can do that too. That's what my hope is. That's why I write, is because I want people to know that they are loved, cherished, valued, and that they have a voice. For you, what is your message? What are you trying to convey to your reader? Because someday you are going to be someone's inspiration. If you are an author, it is without a doubt going to be, you are going to be someone's inspiration if you give a damn about your writing. That's why it's so important to edit, to put out a good cover. You present yourself to the reader through your book. That is how they connect with you. Now, people don't talk about that. They talk about, the marketing and finding the niche, which those things are all true. But when someone buys a book, I don't buy a book simply because it's got a pretty cover on it. I buy a book because of the name that's on it. I buy Tolkien because he inspires me. He didn't set out to inspire anybody. He set out to write a good story. Frank Herbert inspires me. He didn't set out to inspire anybody. He set out to just tackle these different political issues through his stories. Ted Deckard, I buy his books because he inspires me, because the spiritual aspects that he brings to his book just blow my friggin' mind all the time. You are going to be that for somebody someday. But it's if you put the work in, and if you can communicate your message to your readers, they will buy your books without batting an eye, because you will have become an inspiration for them. The way that you process your writing, the way that you write, the way that the words flow onto the paper, they feel that. So that is why I write. That's why I want you to write and figure out what that message is. What do you want to tell people? What message do you have that you want to communicate to them? And then do that. Tell that story, because that's the story that ultimately is going to matter. Verity says, I'm just sitting over here nodding empathetically because this is so true. I'm glad that you're able to connect with this. This is definitely one of my more passionate subjects, as you might have been able to tell. This is probably the most coherent I've been throughout this entire thing, when things aren't flying into my eyes or craziness is happening. So I'm going to leave off with there. I'm going to kind of bust through the next two if possible. So the next question was, are there any benefits to writing fan fiction? People say it's garbage. First off, is there a lot of really bad fan fiction? Yes, there is. We talked about that at the top of the live stream. There is bad fan fiction. That goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that yours has to be. And that doesn't mean that there is a stigma. People, I saw part of where I pulled this question from. The response was that said 90% of fan fiction is garbage. First off, they're pulling that out their butt. They have no statistical data to say that 90% of fan fiction is garbage. I know that there's a lot of fan fiction out there that just isn't great. Whether that's due to the content or the writing, again, I'm about positive messages in writing. Erotica is not that. The freaky bondage stuff, that's not promoting a positive message. That is what perpetuates darkness in people's lives. Just calling it out. People are free to disagree with me, but this is my own personal view, is that there's nothing wholesome or uplifting or positive or frankly inspiring about that. That to me is garbage. Not that the writers are garbage, not that the authors are garbage, but the content itself is trash. It is trashy, period. So when you're writing, or don't let anybody look down on you because of your age. Don't let anybody look down on you for fan fiction. Frankly, everyone writes fan fiction. Every author, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, they would never admit to it. But if you think about it, everything out there under the sun, there are no unique messages. Everything has been written about. There's literally been thousands of years of documented history, of stories dating back back to oral history. It's fan fiction. We've been rewriting the same thing over and over again for centuries. Let that sink in a moment. Rarity says, preach it. Everybody's telling the same stories in different ways. Exactly. So if someone says, well, you're not an author, you write fan fiction, be like, well, what'd you write about? Well, I wrote about this. Guess what? Somebody else did too. And you probably were inspired by them, weren't you? Fan fiction. It inspired you. It's the same story retold again and again and again and again. It's the same thing with fan fiction. That's all it is you're taking something that someone has already done and you're applying your own unique view on it. So that's what happened with 50 Shades of Grey. That's how we got that dumpster fire. Someone read Twilight and said, you know what? I can make something that is so much worse than that and cringeworthy that people will pay me millions of dollars for it. But it started off as a fan fiction. This is why, we have to stop listening to people who are talking down and who think that they're on some high horse. We're all on the same playing field. We're farther along maybe in our experience, but the things that Stephen King writes were inspired by stories that he was influenced by as a kid, and that probably his parents were influenced by as kids and throughout their adult lives. Like, when you read, you're inspired. You take bits and pieces of books and you meld them together up here where all the madness happens, and then it gets spit out as a new story. So it's no different because you're doing something that is labeled Lord of the Rings, Sherlock, Marvel, Peppa Pig, like whatever that particular thing is, it's because you have a passion for that fandom. That's not wrong. There's people who write fan fiction about Harry Potter. There's fan fiction about oh shoot, it's gone. It's gone again. That's just how fast it comes and goes in my head. Right. Verity says, my series started as fan fiction, only I didn't know it was a fanfic at the time. See, perfect example. And actually, by the way, Verity, I'm totally stealing that and using that as an example when I talk to the middle schoolers next. So your name's getting out there. Congratulations. So don't think of fan fiction as like this lowest grade of writing, because it's not. Writing is a level playing field. It's how you tell the story that makes the difference. But everything has been written under the sun. There is nothing new. There are no unique messages. There's only unique messengers. That quote is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. And that is the one that I want you to apply to your writing, is that the message that I have is, or that I'm writing about, is not unique, but the way that I present it is. That is what is important. So focus on that. Okay, you're welcome, Verity. It's super helpful that you're much younger than I am, because I can be like, hey, look, someone else closer to your guys' age, because I feel so friggin' old. 29, man, I'm just about over the hill. All right, last one we've gone over. I appreciate you guys sticking with me despite my ranty rabbit holes that I've gone down, but I'm extremely passionate about this subject. So last question is, how useful is self-editing to a new writer? It is great if you know what you are doing. If you don't know what you're doing, it is not going to help you at all. And by that, I mean, you need to have some context in which that you are framing those things. So if you don't know how to do an edit, then what are you doing? You're not really doing anything. You're not benefiting yourself in any way, because you don't know what it is that you're doing. So my suggestion for you would be this: get a program that will help you do that, and it will help you learn how to do those edits. So the two that I can think of are Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly, both of which I have links down below. Grammarly is free. You can pay for a premium version, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it price-wise. And I'll see if I can get a card up here to my Grammarly versus Pro Writing Aid review. But Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, they give you the reasons why something is wrong, which that to me was the biggest benefit, and what improved my writing and my editing is because I learned, like, well, why does there have to be a comma here after the introductory clause? And it would explain why. And so as I learned, I got better, which then it turned into when I'm editing, then I can help somebody structure it, because I now have a better frame with which to look through, or not frame, lens through which I can look through and go, this isn't quite right because this punctuation is messed up. And this is not because I'm good at punctuation and grammar. This is because I've learned just enough to be dangerous with my own edits. And so I help people kind of frame it, or at least to the point where I go, this is going to be fixed by a copy editor, but here's how you can kind of get a handle on it now. But you want to start off, like I said, with a developmental edit. Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid are not going to help you with that. They're going to help you with the different style, or the different punctuation stuff. You can go to places like Udemy. There's many great editing courses, especially for beginners. And don't get an in-depth one. Don't spend hundreds of dollars on an editing course. Learn the basics of editing. There was one there. If I can I can get the link, I'll put it down below. But it was introductory, and I'm an editor, but the basics of it were so incredibly helpful. Watch people, go to YouTube. You're already here anyway. Go to YouTube and find people who have tips about editing as a beginner. Doing that, and actually I have a video in the works about doing a self-edit. So I'll plan on doing that next, releasing that next week. But if you invest in yourself to get that little bit, then yes, it is going to pay off dividends in the long run. Because if you're going to be self-publishing, if you can clean up a lot of that stuff on the front end, it could mean that it's going to be less expensive for you in the long run to pay professional editors to edit your book. And if you're able to do that, then you're able to look at it and go, okay, this is actually going to be better because I can fine tune it and then send it to an agent and start querying agents. So yes, self-editing is extremely beneficial for new writers because it gives you context with what the editors are going to be sending back in terms of feedback. It'll also help you improve your writing. But if you don't know what to do in an edit other than look for typos and errors, but you have no idea what a structure is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to flow, the pace, the arc. If you don't know how to do that in a developmental edit, then you need to figure out how to learn to do that before you do anything else. Because you will set yourself up for a lot of revisions that would have been unnecessary to do. 3 revisions, you could get a book edited in 3 revisions, self-edit, if you know what it is that you're doing. So that is my recommendations for the editing. Oh, almost sneezed. I have just been on the struggle bus today with just things happening. So thank you guys. I appreciate all of you watching this. Now, later, if you're new, welcome. I kind of did that a little bit late at the end, so hopefully you've stayed for all of this. If so, you're now getting welcomed. Now I feel like a jerk. I'm going to be posting this video up, so it's going to be live. It's going to have the notes. It's going to have the timestamps. If you guys are interested in looking at editing, then go down to the show notes and take a look at Grammarly. Take a look at Pro Writing Aid. Grammarly is great for first-time authors, just kind of looking to get started. It's a very clean interface, very user-friendly. Pro Writing Aid is a little more, well, not a little more, it's a lot more in-depth. But in terms of cost, it costs a lot less than Grammarly does per year. So I recommend doing the combination of both. I say as much in my review. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your support, for joining me. If you guys have questions that you want me to answer and tackle during these live streams, send them to me. I'm so happy to answer those questions, or comment down below. I will answer them. I will go through and answer the comments. So if you have a question about writing or editing or something in general, or just something that you want me to talk about and address, doesn't even have to be a question, just like, could you address this particular thing? I will absolutely take that and look into it. So you can do that down in the comments below, or you can shoot me an email up on my homepage. That's where it is a link that takes you to my website. You can shoot me an email straight from there. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of your support, and I will look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks for the next live stream, and keep an eye out for that new self-editing video that will be coming out next week. I'll see you guys later. Take care.